Welcome to Highly Sensitive, Happily Married, the podcast that teaches you to not only have an easier marriage as a sensitive woman, but to have one that feels more amazing by the day. Where you'll hear relatable stories, love advice that works, and coaching on how to have a marriage where feeling upset and disconnected is a thing of the past, and where instead a sense of loving connection and even fun and lightness is the norm. I'm Hannah Brooks, highly sensitive person, love expert, and marriage coach, and I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. Hello, my lovely ones, and welcome to episode 132, where we are going to talk about how and when to share a complaint, or what I'm going to be calling a grievance. But first, I just want to send a big shout out to all of those people who have rated and reviewed the podcast. Keep them coming. It means so much to me. If you haven't subscribed, rated, and reviewed the podcast yet, if you've been enjoying it, please do that. It means the world to me, and it helps the podcast reach more highly sensitive women like you who could really use this podcast in their ears. So a big thank you in advance for doing that. So let's dive in. Sometimes, or maybe even often, in our intimate relationships, our partner does something, or maybe they even tend to do things that feel hurtful to us, that give rise to emotions in us like anger, hurt, resentment, and more. So sometimes these are big enough. These emotions, these things that our partner has done, they're big enough to feel like a real problem and actually feel like they're interfering with our ability to have the connected, team-oriented, loving marriage we all want. And this applies for those of us who already are doing so much of the emotional work on our own side of the street. So in other words, there are totally times when it's appropriate to communicate to your partner about something that he's done that you really didn't like and don't want to experience again. To share a complaint, we might call it, or to air a grievance. Now, to clear up what I mean by the word grievance, which is the word I'm going to primarily use in this episode, it's defined as a real or imagined wrong or other cause for complaint or protest, especially unfair treatment. And we might even say that this is sort of an emotional injury. I don't really like using that term because it feels like it's something that he's done to you and you're the victim. So I don't think that's a very empowering way to think about it. It's not a very effective way to think about it. So we're just going to call them grievances. And you'll know you have a grievance if you keep going back in your mind to something your partner has done, or you feel like you were really unfairly treated, or, something that he did brought up a lot of pain in you that you can't seem to let go of or move fully past. So sharing these things aren't just doorways to addressing them and avoiding the same things from happening in the future, but they're also a way of letting your partner know you. Letting them learn about you and how things impact you so that they can be more informed and adjust and be more considerate and sensitive in the future where they're able to. So letting your partner know you is a very important part of building over time a relationship that's full of loving sensitivity and care for each other. So that all to say that there really is a time and a place to share these grievances. And an example of one of these for me, something that I've shared with my husband that I was kind of having a hard time moving past fully and really wanted more consideration around, was about money. I mean, on the surface, it was about money, right? It was a time when we had made an agreement, at least I had felt like we made an agreement to not go spending extra money on anything beyond the very basics. And he had gone and bought all these things for his biking hobby, that's the word. Things that weren't necessary, right? Things that were just sort of spiffing his bike up in a fun way. So as much as I had done my own work around my feelings about what happened, about him doing that, and it will always be my responsibility to do that work on my side of the street. Of course, it helps when my husband follows through on our planned agreement instead of disregarding it. So this was something I chose to share with him, this complaint, this grievance, I chose to share with him. And I'll give you some more on that a little bit later. But even though it is appropriate and beneficial to share with your significant other the bigger things that upset you, and this is really important, so perk your ears, it's not the first thing to start with to address unhappiness in relationships, to even address the thing that happened. It's very far from the first thing. And this is the thing that happens usually. We tend to air our grievances and complaints too early, before we've looked at our own side of the street and cleaned that up and done all that we can to shift our own thoughts and feelings and actions in our marriage to improve it all. Usually our approach as women, at least, in our modern way of doing things, tends to be to blame or to, come at him with anger and resentment, really express our grievances from that place. Kind of like, I hate this. I don't want to deal with this pain. So I'm going to just hand it over to you to deal with. Okay, partner? I'm going to blame you, and I'm going to feel anger and resentment, and I'm going to share all of my pain from there, making it yours to deal with. The best metaphor of this that I've heard is in part because it's funny. It's kind of a funny light image, and I think that's always helpful for us to learn, is from Emily Nagoski's book, Come As You Are. And it's the metaphor of a sleepy hedgehog. So she talks about how our own work, when it comes to our emotional pain, no matter what triggered it, is to approach it the way we would if we found a sleepy hedgehog on our chair. What we would do is we'd name that prickly thing. We'd sit with it peacefully. We'd figure out what it needs from us. And then we maybe would tell our partner about it so that he and you could collaborate to help the hedgehog. But what most of us do instead is to shove the hedgehog at our partner and shout, "Sleepy hedgehog, you deal with it." Kind of silly, but I think it gets the message across. Usually when a client comes to me, she's been doing this. She's been voicing plenty of grievances before she's learned how to handle her own hedgehog, right? She's been using anger and the backfiring tactics. And if you don't know what those are yet, it's just blame, complaint, control, demand, like I need you to, and really not bringing ownership and an empowered approach to interacting with your partner or handling your own emotions. In other words, there's a tendency to share our grievances prematurely. So this really tends to not work well at all, right? It's why I call these things backfiring tactics. They're an attempt at getting closer and having more love between you, but they actually create more distance and resentment and disconnection and even disrespect between you and your partner. Emily Nagoski goes on to write, "It's your hedgehog. The calmer you are when you handle it, the less likely you are to get hurt yourself or hurt someone else." So what I'm saying is we need to stop the backfiring tactics. We need to stop going instantly when something happens that we're really upset about, or even as a first attempt to deal with it. Like maybe it's something that happened a few months ago, but you're still really holding on to it. We need to stop making the first step to getting over the grievance be sharing it with your partner. You need to stop trying to share it from those angry, hurt places for a period of time and deal with your own hard feelings skillfully inside of yourself first, right? We've got to care for our hedgehog until it turns into maybe a calmer, softer, but strongly empowered creature, right? Without all those spikes, like maybe my cat Luna, I don't know. And for your relationship to have a stable foundation to deal with grievances well, it really helps to weave in more of the good stuff in your life together. The fun connecting times, the appreciations, the affections, the micro moments of connection and love, right? The laughter. These we can weave in on purpose, as I talk a lot about on the podcast. So this is the reason I've never talked about sharing grievances on the podcast before. Because we don't start with sharing our grievances when we have them, right? We have other things to focus on first. So I want to point you to a place to start, which is episode 106. It's called Grievance, the Biggest Barrier to a Loving Marriage. We could even think of that as part 1 of this episode. Once we've focused on these preliminary things, once we have a better basic culture of safety and respect between you, and if I wasn't clear, let me reiterate, creating that basic culture of safety and respect and connection and good stuff between you is about stopping the backfiring tactics, dealing with your own hedgehog, and then weaving in the good stuff. Almost always, this begins to create or completely creates that great culture between you. And then is the time to start voicing your grievances. So I just want to summarize the mistakes that you're likely making when it comes to sharing grievances. You do it too much. Now, some of you, the opposite might be true. It might be that you never do it. I don't encourage that either. You also likely do it when you are doing it from a reactive, angry place, from what I call reactive anger. You aren't taking care of your own emotions first. Instead, you're trying to force the prickly hedgehog onto your partner before you do that emotion tending. And you forget to do the things that bolster your connection and love and the culture of safety between you. So when we make these mistakes, the voicing of our grievance has way less power, both to get through or be heard by your partner and to actually inspire him to honor it, to do his work, to shift his side of the street when it comes to the things you are upset about. So again, the first work is to do your own inner work on your side of the street. Again, that's specifically to put an end to the backfiring tactics, to build up the culture of love and safety between you, and to learn how to tend to and guide your own emotions, which includes handling and processing your anger and hurt. So you aren't holding on to it and reacting out of it as you share your grievance. So I do want to share a little note on anger here. In the last podcast, I talked about anger. So that's a good one to just, if you find that you're angry a lot and you do find yourself wanting to share or actually sharing your grievances and complaints a lot, listen to last week's episode. Because we really don't want to come from reactive anger or aggression. You want to process that more violent form of anger and shift yourself out of it before you're sharing a grievance with your partner. Now, it's not like you can't have any anger about it. What I call responsive anger is actually a useful anger at times, and that's different than reactive anger. So there's a different podcast on that will help you understand what I mean. It's episode 111. It's called strategic anger. So responsive anger is a whole different experience. It's a whole different thing than reactive anger. And like I talked about at length last episode, you really can channel your anger into effective action, especially responsive anger. And when I say effective action, I mean sharing your grievances skillfully at the right time, in the right way, after doing your own work to caretake your side of the street. And that's really specifically your thoughts and your feelings. So I hope that answers the question of when do we share a grievance? So now the next question is how? How do we share a grievance effectively? So instead of the here's a hedgehog, fix it approach, How do we do it so it invites your partner to know you better and also collaborate on the easing of the pain or the solving of it into the future? As is often true, there's not one recipe, but here's one that I've found to work pretty well. Now, I always encourage a kind of experimental, exploratory approach to these sorts of things. We as humans are not one size fit all, and so our solutions and our ways of communicating can't be either. But more than the specific words we say, the success in sharing a grievance rides on two specific things, two main ingredients. And those are self-ownership and vulnerability. These are always going to be two of the most essential ingredients to any real effective communication with your partner when it comes to something difficult you're discussing. So you got to come from that place. All right. And so this is why your emotional work, doing your own emotional work, has to come first, because it's very, very hard to come from self-ownership and vulnerability when we're angry or resentful. And unfortunately, the emotional work that it takes to come from there, they're really the skills that we're sorely deprived of learning. And this is why I go into depth with my clients on these emotional skills and help them do these emotional work first. Because without learning these skills, it's so much harder to air a grievance in a way that encourages connection and supportiveness. So again, you got to come from self-ownership and vulnerability. And then the specific steps, the things to actually do to air the grievance are: number 1, decide on what incident, which specific grievance you want to air. I don't recommend a bombardment. Right? I only really recommend choosing the ones that are really lingering for you, that you really haven't been able to get past with a lot of your own conscious work on moving past it. Okay, so choose the incident. Step 2, get your partner's consent for the conversation by asking if he's willing to listen with an open heart. Of course, you don't have to use that language. You can put it, some people won't want to hear the words open heart, right? Put it in the language that you think will work for you and your partner. So for me, sharing with my husband about the spending money on the bike stuff thing, using this exact formula, I would say, I'd love to talk about when you purchased those bike items. It would really help me, so it's not driving a wedge between us. Would you be willing to listen with an open heart? And of course, if he says yes and gives consent, then you can proceed to the next step, which is owning your role in what happened out loud. And that could include apologizing for anything you feel that you genuinely can apologize for around the incident. So it might sound something like this for me. Looking back at when that happened and you spent that money on those bikes, I see that I assumed that we had the same understanding of our agreement. And I realize now that I could have made sure that it was a clearer agreement. And I'm sorry for not seeing that and doing that. The next step is kind of optional. You could optionally assume positive intent, again, out loud. So this could look like, I'm sure your intention was only to help yourself be happy, which contributes to us being happy, and that you never meant pain to come from buying those bike things. So this is an optional step, but I think it really helps set the stage for your partner to be best able to hear you because their defenses aren't put up. And that's true with that last step of owning your role in what happened. Those two things combined can be really powerful in making him more receptive to hearing you. The next step, step 5, is to share with vulnerability and ownership what you thought and felt during that incident. So it might sound like this. When you bought those things and I found out, I told myself the story that what I want and what I'm worried about doesn't matter to you. And then I felt really unimportant. Step 6. Share what your feelings were rooted in. And what I mean by this is what was it perhaps in the past that created a sort of sensitivity to this type of issue? And this is when it's really helpful to kind of have a sense of like, well, I have a tendency to feel like a bad person when other people say this or do that. Or I have a tendency to, get really afraid when XYZ happens. Like for me, I've had a tendency to go into a space of feeling unimportant. And it comes from early times in my life when I got the message that I was unimportant. So most of us have those, right? So to share what those feelings that came up in me when he bought the bike parts sort of behind my back, to share what those feelings were rooted in might sound like I am historically fairly sensitive to feeling unimportant because of things that happened in the past. I might just leave it at that because my husband already knows this. If your husband or partner doesn't know this about you, it's a good time to share. Well, like, hey, this happened when I was a kid. And so ever since then, I've tended to, really hate it when people interrupt me because it's so easy for me to feel dismissed, right? Something like that. And I would say that step 6 is optional. It's certainly not required. It's just a helpful step. All right, step 7 is share the emotional experience you would like to have had. Right? The emotion it would have helped to feel when the incident happened. So for me, I might say something like, in retrospect, what I most wanted to feel when I found out that you did that and we were talking about it originally was important and considered. Step number 8 is also optional. You can optionally share a request for what you'd like your partner to do in the future, like the action that would help you feel that emotion that you just named. So for me, it would be, if I want to feel important and considered, I would ask him to do a specific thing that would help me feel that in the future. So it might sound like this: in the future, or at least until we're no longer trying not to spend much, would you be willing to come to me when you want to purchase something above $50? That's for like a pleasure activity like biking. See, it's a simple request. Specific and simple. All right. Step 9, open it up to inviting your partner's thoughts and ideas for the future. So you could say something like this: what's coming up for you? Or, I'm also open to hearing your ideas and thoughts. So that's it. I'm going to quickly repeat the main steps. Choose the incident. Get your partner's consent by asking if they're willing to listen with an open heart. Step 3, own your own role in what happened out loud. 4, assume positive intent out loud. 5, share vulnerably and with ownership what you thought and felt when the incident happened. 6, share what your feelings may have been rooted in from your past. 7, share the emotional experience you would like to have had instead of the one that you did have when the incident happened. 8, optionally, take it further by sharing a request for what you would like in the future. And 9, open it up to inviting his thoughts and ideas for the future. Now, if you want a sort of shorter, more generalized summary of what we did there, I just want you to notice that there are really 3 stages. So there's the setting the stage for your partner to best receive your words and hear you. And then share the heart of the grievance. And then move into requests and solutions for the future. And all of that is done with vulnerability and ownership. So these 9 little steps are one way to do it, a powerful way to do it. And in my program Treasured, we actually go into more depth on all of it with a very clear process for resolving old emotional injuries or grievances inside of ourselves and moving forwards as a loving, cooperative team and getting closer and more connected as you go, even as hard things in life happen. And as part of that, I want you to understand that what we just did is not a full conflict resolution process. It's really more of a simple way of airing what you've been holding on to that's been hurting, that happened in your relationship. It can be a part of a conflict resolution process, though. But there's often more to do to really resolve conflicts. And I have a whole conflict solutions for sensitive couples process that I teach my clients in Treasured. So what I've shared today is kind of the tip of the iceberg, but a great starting place. So great relationships do come from pushing for growth a bit. They really do. But this means first inside of yourself, and then between you and your partner. My husband actually thanks me for bringing these things up now. Even just a couple of days ago, he said to me, "Thank you for pushing me on these things. It helps me be a better person and husband, and it helps our relationship." That's a pretty wonderful thing to hear, huh? And it's because I'm able to do it in a way that he's able to hear and receive and work with and then want to honor. And for me, just like for you, we've all got to start with the internal work to get to that place where you can peacefully navigate in an empowered way these conversations, right? I've done such deep work on this within myself. And that's where the real power and the real work is for you too. Now, ownership is harder than it may sound, like I said a few minutes ago. And so is vulnerability. So many or most of my clients who come to me don't yet have the skills of guiding and processing their emotions or the skill to take ownership, which is one of the key skills that actually allows them to share vulnerably instead of accusatorily or defensively or angrily, which are much more likely to elicit defensiveness and lock you into antagonism and misunderstanding and escalating arguments, instead of the sort of team approach, right? The supportiveness and connection and ultimately emotional support that you get from sharing from vulnerability. And just like my clients, you listening likely don't have these skills fully either. And nor did I before I learned them. So again, my warning to you is that using this process is going to be so much less effective or just not work at all without these skills in place. So if you haven't done this deeper work, you're going to want to start with that. These emotional skills of guiding yourself into these places where it's easy to take ownership and it's easy to be vulnerable and it's easy to not be in reactive anger. Right? So you're going to want to start with that work. And this is why my marriage coaching program, Treasured, is so effective. Because this is where we start with these emotional skills, right? This is what you develop, these super foundational skills, really of emotional agency. Once you've really rooted in those skills, then we're able to move on and really work on the specifics of of communication and inviting your partner into being your teammate and making your relationship better and better and better. So hop on the wait list for Treasured. Early enrollment, which is only for people on the wait list, opens up October 16th, which is right around the corner. And if you are part of that early enrollment, you get first dibs on joining this round of Treasured. And there are quite a few people on the wait list already. So I may not even open regular enrollment if it fills up from the wait list. But you also get the access to the early enrollment discount, which you will not get if you wait till regular enrollment time. So I highly recommend joining the waitlist while you can. I will put the direct link in the show notes, or you can go over to www.lifeisworthloving.com/treasured. There you'll find the description of the program, an in-depth description, as well as the button you can click that takes you to the signing up for the waitlist form. All right. So I hope that this outline of how and when to share a grievance has been helpful to you. And I just have to tell you the power of being able to share grievances in a way that invites collaboration and inspires your partner to kind of support you through that pain and avoid it in the future is so huge. So use this process if you feel like you're really ready to, if you know you can do it really calmly and from vulnerability and self-ownership. And if not, get to doing that work first and look forward to the time when you're really ready to share your grievances in an effective way. All right, be oh so well.